appreciate that so much. And thank you so much for the presentation that I am going around the state giving to Democratic Project 2025 and what we can do about it. I'm not promising to solve everything, but I have some I'm seeing from my perspective as one of the and how I think we can just give you a very brief update that I came today. We Concord, and while we typically have 100 to 273 last meeting of the state fiscal year that had a lot of business that had to happen. I voted on my first contract over $1 billion, with a I have 20 years of experience, and I have a there's nothing quite like for one of the Medicaid contracts that's over $1 billion to really impress on what we're working on. So I want to say lonely on the executive council, and it is a real challenge. I consider my every time I go to my office, every day I wake up and I get to do this job. So I want to thank all of you who allowed me to step up and serve at the state level. Thank you so much. And I'm glad. Thank you for the extra 5 minutes. Representative Wilhelm has a very hard to hear quickly because we have a lot of ground to cover. And this isn't hiring speech. Invite me back and I'll give you a good speech. But today I want to start by talking about the current bill. If you advance, terrific. As you recall, November around the country, and here's what we are looking at. I'll remind you, the Executive Council is unique. That has a we have not just a governor, we also have the executive. We have a Republican governor, and we have a majority council. The legislature. So in to 8 majority, a super majority in the Senate, and in the House, majority was still the Republican. They only had 2 majority, which is a 44 seat majority held by the Republicans. Is that a lot of the government? We that some of the bills that we have been able to in the last session where we had more leverage, that close margin, we no longer have legislation passed, and there was very little that we could to remind us of this, because a lot of us are bad, and the truth is there's not much that we can do about it. We have to get a bit of time without fighting each other, because we're not going to be able to win. And so part of it is that we need to get the grace for each other, recognizing that. So what 2025? President Trump ran away from it on the campaign. I have no idea what those people are doing, and he did and has been very consistent about. Remember, right wing, it's really a Christian nationalist, I would say a white at the federal level that has two objectives, and these two objectives are: one is to shrink the size of government. Two, government in this white Christian nationalist agenda. And it's online, you can literally look it up. Now I'm going to condense into a couple of slides, so forgive me for, generalizing. In New Hampshire, we have not just Project 2025 that's being enacted here. The Free State Project, which is a political migration movement that started a group of anti-government, extreme, pseudo-libertarians as being a low population state where they could encourage. They got pledges of 20,000 people to move here so that they agenda of dismantling government and create a libertarian utopia. Now, they have been extremely effective. People that moved here, as far as we can tell, 222 Republicans in the House, remember I mentioned that, are either members of the Free State Project with the Free State Project and voting. The Project 2025 is project, but the Venn diagram where they overlap is exactly the same. The idea of shrinking government, dismantling this. Grover Norquist was the one who's the head of Americans for Tax Reform, and he said, and I simply want to shrink it, reduce it to the size where I can drown it in the bathtub. Okay, and further than this, in New Hampshire, for those of you who are newer to New Hampshire, this was an agreement. This was sort of an agreement with the devil, if you will, about 50 years ago between and Bill Loeb, who was the publisher of the Union Leader, and they sort of would put this, who was running for higher office in New Hampshire, would have to agree that they were not going to raise. Years, pledge politics has dominated our state politics in New Hampshire. Honestly, been very ineffective at fighting. So even Democrats who take the pledge as painted as pro-income tax or big tax, somehow fooled everyone that they are the party that is responsible for leave out the truth about property taxes. Has anyone? No. In the history of New Hampshire, I don't think anyone's property taxes have gone down. And you know who's been in charge for the Republican Party. So let's talk about Project 2025. The two things. Remember, this is about shrinking government, and it's about here. And I will just tell you that my as the governor's inauguration, so I had her inaugural address, and it was abundantly clear that the principles of Project 2025 were, and this also became clear in her budget address. So if anyone wants to see this, I would encourage you to go back and listen to the governor's budget address from January and the governor's inaugural address from January and the budget address from February. She laid it all out there very clearly. And so I'm not going to talk about the Project 2025 components at the federal level because I think you all follow the news and you can see these things. So at the state level, my point is that Project 2025 is not just happening in DC, it is happening in Concord. And so with regard to shrinking government, here are some of the major components. Expanding school vouchers. The governor just passed legislation or just signed into law legislation to expand vouchers, to make them universal so that now there is no income limit. Someone could be a billionaire in New Hampshire and they would still be able to get the $5,000 subsidy to send their kid to private school. And of course, that means less money for public schools. So that's expanding school vouchers. No new taxes, reducing taxes. You know, Project 2025, it didn't just start over. That's been in the works for several years. And so over the last several years, we've seen the Republican majorities in the legislature reduce the interest and dividends tax. Millions and millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars over the next decade that are not going to be available to pay for things like public schools or Medicaid or some of the other things. And that's how they take this credit for claiming that they are lowering your taxes. Now, very few people are actually paying the interest and dividends tax. You have to make a fair amount of money from investments, and so that's a pretty small group of people. But they claim this is where they get their mantra of being low taxes or no taxes. Now, shrinking government efficiency, it's such a great word. Efficiency, we all know government is terribly inefficient and we want our taxpayer dollars to be spent efficiently. You know how